In this video, we're going to take a look at Callifolio's Bouton door. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion. This is a very bright, kind of yellowish kind of orange, much like a sunrise. It is really beautiful to look at. It's a great color that, with that, I still don't want to read a whole page of this. I feel it may be too aggressive, that much of it. But this is an amazing compliment on the page, without a doubt. It shades and does so beautifully. Just looking at it brings the joy of a new day and new accomplishments to be had. I love the tone of this ink right here that you are seeing. Of course, the beauty is going to be lost on most of your non-fountain pen papers, but that's to be expected, and I would never hold against an ink how it does on paper that really isn't made to handle it. Do I like this ink? I like it a lot. I really do. This is absolutely gorgeous. This is going to go on my list for as I need orange inks in the future. I can definitely see going after a bottle of this. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Pierre Cardin President with a medium nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the fine nib, you see that beautiful color that I was mentioning. You see that there's no feather, no spread. The shading that is going on is absolutely amazing. Now, orange inks don't always shade so well, and most of them don't shade very well at all. This one, without a doubt, is a gorgeous exception. Looking at the medium nib, it is just about the same tone that we had with the fine. We get no feather, we get no spread, we get that same amazing shading going on. Now, it doesn't shade like some of those camouflage greens that we would get, but it goes in and out of its dark and light tones so much. As an accent color in editing what you're looking at, you can't help but draw your attention to it. The double broad is about the same tone that we're seeing with the fine and the medium. It's just the much thicker lines make a lot stand out a whole lot more. Now, we're not getting any feathering. We're not getting any spread. You really get to see just how much the shading is going on in all of the rest. Really becomes pronounced and much easier to see with this double broad. I don't know that... There's not. I know, I'm looking at it. There is not a single word without shading. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Pelikan M120 Idyllic Blue with a fine nib, a Pelikan P200 with a medium nib, a Pelikan M205 the Duo Highlighter with a double broad nib. The next writing sample is done on a WritePad's reporter pad. Looking at the fine nib, we get roughly the same tone that we had with the Clairfontaine. We're not getting any feathering, we're not getting any spread. We are getting shading right off the bat. Tortoise shading, the shading, tortoise shading is shading. Amazing. This paper, for me, is seeming to do even better as this brief time goes on. I really do enjoy these. Looking at the medium nib, we get about the same tone that we had with the fine. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it does shade. It is gorgeous. I'm going to give you just a moment just to enjoy the beauty of this ink. Looking at the double broad, I had very low expectations going into this one. It does not feather, it does not spread, it does shade, and it shades almost as well as what we had seen on the Clairefontaine. It still holds true that the entire time, the tone was the same on this paper, and I was really expecting a lot more tone shift in what would happen here. No, strong ink. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding, no ghosting, just great performance. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done in a FieldNotes reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, it is a little bit lighter, I think, than we had on the previous writing samples. We're not getting any feathering, we're not getting any spread. You can still read it, but as this goes on and you see multiple lines of it, you can see why I wouldn't want a whole page of this. Now, we are even getting some shading on this paper that very rarely shows shading, and it is there because the shade is strong. Looking at the medium nib, we get about the same tone that we had in the fine. We get no feather. We get no spread. We do get some shading. It is not as pronounced, but it is definitely there when you look at the on the top line. Look at the SE in Tortoise. You see it gets a little bit darker. Oddly, the medium didn't shade as well as the fine, but that's okay. It's still doing fairly well. Looking at the double broad, we have about the same tone that we had with the fine and the medium. We get no feather. We get no spread. We get almost no shading, and I was a little surprised. You do see some of it come in when you look at Tortoise. More when the pen doubles back over itself in the writing is when the shading comes through. Not a paper known for its qualities in bringing out the shading of ink. Looking at the back of the page, we can see there are some spots where the ink went deep into the paper, but it never came through, never touched the page underneath, and ghosting way under control, which you expect for such a light color ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, we get close, not just a little bit different than from the original Clairfontaine. Now we get no feather, we get no spread, we do get some of the shading. This paper has generally done fairly well with fountain pen inks, and it continues to have that really good performance. The shading that's coming through here is nowhere near like we saw on the right pad or on the Clairfontaine, but it is there from time to time. Looking at the medium nib, we get about the same tone that we had in the fine. We don't get any feathering. We don't get any spread. We get little spots of shading here and there. Again, this paper doesn't really do that a whole lot. I don't know that when you're using this notebook, you care the most about the shading, but most about its portability. This is such good paper. Looking at the double broad, I thought this was a real opportunity to take advantage of some of these papers. The tone is the same that we had before. We're not getting any feather. We're not getting any spread. The shading on this double broad is really coming through well. My thought that the double broad, being that broad and wet, would really decimate the papers. It hasn't. It is done very well, and I really think that's speaking a lot to this ink. Looking at the back of the page, you see the only place it came through really heavy was on the double broad. Otherwise, there's no bleeding that touched the page underneath, and the ghosting very under control. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diatramentis Red Orange. Here is Krishna Orange Honey. Here is Pilot Sunset. Here is Robert Oster Orange. The next writing sample is done in an Office Depot reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, we get about the same tone, maybe a slight bit darker than we had from the original Clairfontaine. We get no feathering. I mean, nothing standing out to me, but we definitely have some spread. That's a fine, and it looks a bit thicker, and you'll see that a little bit later. We do get some spots of shading that are coming through, which are always a pleasant surprise with this paper. So this ink is doing extremely well. Looking at the medium nib, and at this point you're able to see above the fine, and you see the spread that the fine had. The medium is about the same tone. It has no feather. It does have a little bit of spread, but nowhere as much as that fine did. It does shade, which, again, with this paper, I am at awe about how much this ink wants to shade. Even this paper's not going to hold it back. Makes me wonder how the copy paper's going to do. Looking at the double broad nib, we get about the same tone that we had with the fine and the medium. We're not getting any feathering, but we're certainly getting quite a bit of spread. There is spots of shading that are going to come through, but very minimal. This is some of the least shading that we've seen in any of the papers so far. Luckily, we have copy paper to go. Looking at the page underneath, you can see a lot of spots where it did dot the page underneath, although I don't think it would stop you from using that page. And seeing the back of the page, you completely understand why. With the extreme amount of ghosting, you can't use the back of this page. While it's nice to compare it to other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a blue ink by Monteverde, Horizon Blue. Here is a green ink by Diamine, their Apple Glory. Here is a purple ink by Montegrappa, Violet. Here is a brown ink by Monteverde, their Gemstone, Moonstone. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the fine nib, we get a similar-ish enough tone to what we got from the Clairfontaine. Now, we do get a tiny bit of feathering the entire way through, but that feathering shouldn't stop you from using this. We do get minimal spread. Really, I think it's a matter of it's the feathering and the more absorbent. There's some spread. Big deal. It's copy paper. And we get no shading. Not unexpected. Looking at the medium nib, we get about the same tone that we had with the fine. We do get some feather. Yes, we expect it. We do get some spread. Yes, we accept it. Are either the feather or the spread something that would stop you from using this paper? No, I don't think so. The lack of shading for how strong this ink has been with shading, on the other hand, I could see you not wanting to use it for that reason, because you're losing such a great quality of this ink. Looking at the double broad, here's where we get to take advantage of things. Maybe. Same tone as the fine and the medium. It does feather, yes, it does spread, and I think it spreads more than we had with the other pens. There are even a couple of moments that shade technically comes through. Look at the in trouble, the very top first word. It's there. It's just, it's there. It's unimpressive, this paper. Looking at the next page, you see I circled two spots where on the double broad it did bleed and touch the page underneath. Otherwise, the fine and the medium did not bleed. Plenty of ghosting, which we would expect. I don't know about using the back of this page. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? In general, this always looks good. And to the admirer of orange inks, which I am, this is great with everything. Still, my favorite look for this came from a regular to slightly wet medium nib. I really thought it kept it dark enough to be easily read and really made all of that shading show off so well. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you want to be able to follow me over on Instagram, I'm there as an ink guy. Thanks for watching.